Yo, Billy, you know what's awesome?
What's that, man?
Fantasy adventure flicks, yo.
Yes. So, not that I needed the inspiration, but since we were discussing Phantasm, the director's only other claim to fame is Beastmaster. And so
Yep.
obviously it popped up on my Amazon when it's like, oh, well, you've been paying attention, so here's some Beastmaster. Well, I don't need an excuse to watch Beastmaster.
Right.
Beastmaster is awesome. And it's like we mentioned, Ellie, you can have your discussion about varying quality of cinema, as it were. But at the end of the day, Beastmaster is now and has always been awesome. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's a fun movie. It doesn't try to be anything that it's not. And what it is, it kicks up to 11. Like it
Yep.
really is just it's a great fantasy movie, especially whenever you're like talking early 80s special effects and
Right.
but it's really got everything. And like I don't think like today on Scary Dad we did an hour and a half long show about remakes. The good, the bad, and the ones you should never touch. Beastmaster is one that, I don't think it could do with a remake because there's just kind of a weird sort of innocence about it
Right.
that you wouldn't be able to recapture that magic. It's just something there that makes it such kind of a crappy movie be so awesome.
Yeah. I think we might have touched on it before, but Beastmaster is really Conan light, right?
Mhm.
It's a more acceptable version of Conan for a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, which is right at the point when I saw this. Was I was at that age, so um, it was the perfect movie. And I kind of, when we were texting back and forth, this was my go-to at this time, man. I loved these kind of movies, man. Beastmaster was really up there on the list, and I never get tired of it. Uh, it's got a magic to it that I always want to give credit to Coscarelli for it, because it's almost that same wonderment that he had for the Phantasm thing that he carried over into Beastmaster.
Mhm.
Just like the ring with the eye in it. And I mean, there's all these freaky things that are in Beastmaster, but it's that a thing. It's that gateway horror thing, right? It's a little scary, but not too scary, except for the fact that Rip Torn is throwing children into a burning fire.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of actual true horror elements. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff in there that I mean, I was surprised because this is not there's a lot of movies that I saw when I was a kid, saw it a lot when it was like on HBO, and then it skipped 20 years.
Yeah.
This is not one of them. I've watched Beastmaster at least once every few years for as long as it's been out because it's just one of those that I love. It's one of those. It's a core part of me because when you had Beastmaster, like it was not too far off from He-Man. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like they look the
Right.
same, and there's the sword and the sorcery sort of thing, and
Yeah.
they've got real magic in it. He's actually talking to the animals. He can see through their eyes. So there's so much. There's a lot packed into it, and it doesn't. When I say there's the innocence, it's like it's not cynical. It's not.
Right.
It's not. And it's an extreme example, but it's not Army of Darkness where it's self-aware
Right.
and like,
Right.
I'm just around all these peasants and they're weirdos, and I'm just gonna, because there's a lot of movies like the remake of Clash of the Titans was like that, where it's
Yeah.
like kind of self-aware and cynical, and it's like, no, I like the wonder, I like the fantasy, I like that. We can do a whole show on Clash of the Titans because
Me
that was
too, man.
another one that was just absolutely.
Yeah. I was hoping we would at least bring it up in this conversation, because it is by far this, that and Beastmaster, to me, you can't find a better example of just that escapism that those movies had.
And I was surprised again that it was only PG. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what movie was it that started the PG-13, but Red Dawn. So like Red Dawn should have seriously been rated R, but they but like Red Dawn, Gremlins, those sorts of things where it's like, oh, it's a PG movie, and you're like, dude, Gremlins is rough.
Yeah.
Gremlins, if they were going for horror light, they failed because it's
Yeah.
full on horror. It just doesn't have a whole lot of blood in it.
Right.
But Beastmaster has some chill, like terror. Well, yeah, and it doesn't just have one
Well,
pair of boobs; it's got two.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not only do you get to see Tanya Roberts and all of her glory, you get the witches that are running around with no shirts on too. And it's just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel about this.
Right. But yeah, dude, the like everything about it, again, watching it anew, I felt like I was a little kid again. Whenever he leaves, like they attack his village, and that's all gets messed up, and then he's just like running across the mountains being strong and swinging his sword around, and you're just like, dude, this dude's about he's badass.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't seen him be badass. He's not like Conan where he's pushing the wheel and you see him growing up. Like, he just goes from little kid to grown up, and he's badass, and it's like but
yeah, absolutely love it, man. And who didn't want to be able to have animals as your partners, right? I mean, look at the advantages he had, being able to see through the hawk's eyes, and having the tiger again, like you said, the whole He-Man thing. There's Battle Cat, right? Kodo and Podo, right?
And, dude, those are the coolest sidekicks.
Yeah.
Like, what kid didn't want ferrets? I think the ferret, like when people our age got old enough to be able to command, like, I will have ferrets, because the first time I actually saw a ferret in a pet store, I was like young adult. I was like 18 or 19. Yeah. And the first thing I thought of was like Beastmaster. Like, the reason these are here is because enough kids saw Beastmaster that now they're buying them and taking them home as pets. Yeah. And they're grown-ups now, so their parents can't say no.
Very true. So, I mean, you got Tanya Roberts, being the good-looking lady. You got action sequences that are still fantastic. You got Wishery. You got Rip Torn with a fake nose. Great bad guy. You've even got a little S&M with these berserker people that they make, right?
Those guys scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like they're looking through they're like, oh hey, they were creeping through the castle, and they're like, okay, yeah, these guys are really bad. We're just gonna drop this weird like glow stick leech into this guy's ear, and then just wrap him in blades and just cut him loose, and he's all like, he's just but I just think it's so great. Like, he is pissed at that ferret. He's like, I'm gonna get this ferret. He's just like chasing him down the hall. The ferret's like, I got him.
Busting open the pipes trying to get to it. It's great, man. Great. And it really, I don't know if this was the first one that I saw. I mean, I want to say maybe I saw Conan first, but this just seemed to resonate a bit more because, again, of the age, and it just kind of worked.
I think because there was so much spinning around. Like, I used to get Beastmaster and Conan kind of confused in my head. Like,
yeah, you kind of can.
I mean, it'd be that sort of like, for whatever reason, I would imagine like Rip Torn drawing the bow and shooting the snake. And it's like, it was like, that's not there. That's Darth Vader doing that. But it was still like, you had so many things locked together in that world that we grew up in that, but I mean, I think Conan 2 is, I mean, there's a reason why Schwarzenegger got so famous from it. It's an awesome movie.
It holds up too. Yeah, it really does. The second one, not so much.
Not so much. One, but but I think, like you said, Beastmaster was more accessible. Maybe it was because it was a little more. It was less serious. Maybe it was a little bit more lighthearted.
Well,
Despite the heart,
we say that, but those darn creatures, man, those
yeah,
things were I mean, these things would grab a person in its wings, basically, and digest your body and just drop the bones on the ground.
and they killed it. I mean, that was a kid in the cage. I mean, that was a straight up kid that they're like, he's like, oh, they've got a kid in the cage. I'm gonna let him out, and they're like, slurp.
Wow, I mean, just when you think about that, and again, that feels like such a, and I've said it before, such a Lucio Fulci kind of thing to just be stuck in the middle of this adventure movie. You know, here's a kid and his tiger, and they've got a good communication. Wait a minute, what's this thing? Right,
Dude, yeah. Well, there was a lot of that, like the tar mode. There's just a lot of stuff that was kind of a visceral thing that was just kind of like this world is dangerous.
yeah,
Like there's no, I mean, but like I said, like I think though with Conan, like compare and contrasting, because obviously Conan's a better film
yeah,
in general, but I think Beastmaster resonated a lot with us more because it was so far-fetched.
yeah,
Whereas Conan did seem a little bit more based in the real world with some black magic elements. Beastmaster didn't seem like it was it seemed more of a fantasy world, more
right,
of a fantasy realm, because those bird guys they're not real, you know.
yeah,
You've seen snake charmers. Like there are people who charm snakes and
right.
have pets. Um but
Yeah, I mean, I think the Conan thing was more seedy, right? I mean, it was even the people he was around were not good people, right? I mean,
mhm,
you know, so you're hanging out in a den of thieves, and you've been trained to be the ultimate killing machine. So it had a little more leanings towards those things where a 12-year-old kid likes the idea of he can also talk to animals. You
yeah,
know, it's like, oh, all right.
yeah. Well, and he totally uses the tiger to get the girl, which is
Oh
awesome.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
he's just
Who wouldn't?
he's, he's like, "Rawr, rawr," like, put up your dukes, tiger. Tiger's all like, I'm out. He's like, haha, I'm a hero. It was so cool. It's like such a me thing to do. Like if I was a super muscle bound dude with a kick ass
Right.
sword and a tiger,
And to me, I don't know about you, but every time I see Mark Singer in anything, I always think of Beastmaster, right? So
Mhm.
even when he was in V, the TV series, I was like, hey, that's Beastmaster.
Well, dude, yeah, he was in a serious drama where he played a blind guy,
Yeah, yeah.
and that was in rotation on HBO. And I remember I used to watch it because it was Beastmaster.
Beastmaster.
So,
Cool.
and I mean, we mentioned obviously how violent and disturbing some of these scenes are, but then that brings us to Dragonslayer, bro.
Oh,
Like that was another one that I watched a lot, and
yeah.
Dragonslayer, I haven't watched that in a long time. I mean, it hasn't been like forever, but I hadn't watched it since Game of Thrones was a thing. So like probably 10
Yeah.
years or so. Um, but having watched Game of Thrones and seeing Dragon Slayer, I'm like, dude, special effects has not come that far
I'm telling you.
because man, Dragon Slayer holds up. I
Yes.
mean, it's
It's still,
insane.
to me, it's still the best dragon that's ever been on screen, man.
Mm-hmm.
The thing breathes. I mean, you can, I mean, and you're going to, this is a puppet, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, this thing is a ILM puppet, and it still blows my mind what they pulled off with this movie. Why this movie is not held up to such a high regard, I have no idea. To me, it is one of the best fantasy films, period.
I totally agree. And I remember being blown like I used to believe that dragons were real because of
Yeah,
Dragon Slayer.
sure.
It's like it was one of those things where it wasn't too much like if dinosaurs were real, it only stands to reason. Maybe they're not real now, but at least they used to be because look at that thing. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
yeah,
how convincing it was. Like you
yeah.
can't just make something like that up. Look at it. You know what I mean? And that was my kid logic, but I mean, that was that good of a dragon. And
And,
the world was like you mentioned, the world was dirty. It was
yeah.
smoky. There's wood, there's cooking fires. It's not Disneyland or whatever, you know, like it's not
Right.
Fantasyland. It's a real lived in, dirty, medieval sort of world that made it feel all the more real, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah. And also the contrasting story that's going on in all this with, the king and the raffle that they have to appease the dragon. I mean, it's classic folklore kind of stuff, but it's done so well. It's one of those movies that I cannot believe they haven't remade, but at the same time, I'm so glad they haven't remade it because they would ruin it.
mhm. I think, yeah, well, because too, it is extremely dark. I
Yeah,
mean, even though it does have like technically a happy ending, I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of
there's some
gore.
there's some rough stuff in this movie that people just probably just totally forgot about. And you brought it up when we were talking the other day about the baby dragons
Well,
and
well, and that's the thing. What you mentioned. So what's happened? If you haven't seen Dragon Slayer in a while, um, there's a dragon, and in order to appease it, they have to sacrifice somebody. You know,
the virgin.
well, they have to sacrifice a virgin, but they have to sacrifice a person once every however long. And so the king has a raffle, and there's a name drawn, and they chain up this woman to a cart, and they push her down the hill or up the hill to the dragon, and then the dragon comes out and just immolates her,
Yeah.
just sets her on fire, just boom. And she's all pulled, like they're pulling on, she's pulling on her handcuffs that are cuffing her to the thing because she don't want to die, even though she's like kind of being forced, like she is the sacrifice, so she's taken one for the team. But once the dragon crawls out of his hole, and you're like, oh, this is the real stuff right here.
Yeah.
Then she's like ripping her own hands off trying to get away.
Yeah.
And then whoof, like there's no happy ending for that one.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is you've got a wizard who has up until now kind of kept the dragon at bay. Like, I guess the wizard was the one that organized the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And he ends up getting killed. And then the princess finds out that her name has been kept out of the raffle. So she steps up. She steps up and takes one for the team by rigging the raffle where it's only her name in the raffle. So she's going to get, so you think, oh man, this is one heroic chick right here.
Yeah.
Certainly she's not going to end up baby dragon kibble. But what ends up happening is one of the more horrific sort of after deaths that you've ever seen. And I had forgotten about that because I was just like, oh, she's going down in there to get the scales and yada, yada, yada. And then she steps up. Oh my God. And it's so real looking. Like there's entire horror movies that would spend their whole budget to have just this half second of footage of body parts just kind of getting chomped on by these baby dragons. It's amazing. And it's so just like, oh, because you don't really know what happened to her until later. Like,
well, Peter McNichol cuts her free to set her free because he's fallen in love with her, right? That's the whole point of doing this, is to slay the dragon and save the princess. And he cuts her free out front. Go about your way. Well, she just goes right into the den on her own. She gives herself up.
Yeah, but you don't see her. You don't see her die.
Right.
You don't see her get burnt. So you don't know if she's gonna come out like riding the dragon or something. You know, like you don't know what's, like you're like, well, that's probably a bad idea. But you don't see her die. But then you see what happens later.
What's left of her? Yeah,
and it's just like, ooh.
To me, I don't know if you're really, really familiar with Lucio Fulci's Zombie, but there's a scene where in the hut when the girl that gets the splinter in the eyeball and she's laying there on the ground and the zombies are sitting there and they're just pulling pieces off of her and eating her. It's very reminiscent to that with these baby dragons eating this princess, and it's just like, how much more horror can you get than this scene? I mean, it's amazing. And what's great about it, there's so many great things about Dragonslayer. it's the reason that it's on the very first episode of Hail Ming. I mean, we knew going into that and the other movie I'm going to bring up a little bit was on the first episode, but so much great stuff happens in this movie, even with the wizard, because he has this Obi-Wan Kenobi thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You strike me down, I'll become greater than you ever imagined, that kind of thing. But when Peter McNichol finds the princess dead and he kills the baby dragons, the reaction that the mama has is, to me, it's just as equivalent as when Christopher Reeve or when Superman rips the door off of Lois Lane's car and she's dead and he holds her for a while. You see him have that breakdown and then he just goes, and takes off. That's that dragon coming down that hallway after they killed the babies. And it's always just chilled me when I saw that, because I was like, oh, it is on.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the thing is, because it was kind of like, Clash of the Titans or whatever, where he's like, okay, well, I've got my shield, I've got my special spear, I've got my spells, I've got my magic rock,
a little amulet, yeah.
I'm gonna go kick some ass, and then Dragon's like, no, you're not. And Dragon just wrecks shop. Yeah. I mean, she's not nice, and it was, again, watching this just what was great too, and I mean, just a couple little Easter eggs, because I said I'm surprised that, especially given Game of Thrones and the popularity of it, like the main bad guy in Dragonslayer is named Tyrion.
Yeah.
And the main good girl is named Valerian, and you go, what's Valerian? Valerian was a country in Game of Thrones. It was
right.
it was Valerian wine and Valerian steel. So that was no accident.
Right.
Like Martin took those names directly out of Dragonslayer. And
well, also the Americanized Matthew Broderick version of Godzilla, it pulls from this movie as well. I don't care what anybody says, but the whole idea of the babies running around and they kill the babies and Mama Godzilla reacts, it's identical to what happens in this movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of Easter eggs, Game of Thrones type stuff. The dragon looks almost identical when it's flying to the Game of Thrones dragons. I mean, and again, the animation style that they had to do, the stop motion, almost like it was literally animation, but Mary Poppins did so, like, however it was that they did it, it works. I mean, it looks real, especially when they're flying against silhouettes, flying across the moon and stuff. I mean, and I'm sitting watching this on an early edition VHS with the little tracking problems and being like, this is brilliant. Like, this is amazing.
To tell you how big of a fan I am, I actually have a fan remastered, where a fan went and remastered the movie, because it never got a remaster when they released it. Even for DVD, it still looks like the VHS. And these fans have got their hands on it and did just cleaned it up, made it look great. So I've got a copy of that laying around here somewhere. But that's how much of a fan of Dragonslayer I am. I would love to see a 4K remastered.
The weird thing is, it's a Disney Lucasfilm collaboration, which means that somebody somewhere ought to start working on it, because it really is. I mean, again, there's one of those that I watched a lot when I was a kid, and again, I full on believed in dragons straight up, because I mean, even Mandalorian pretty much like knocked off Dragonslayer here recently, because the way that the dragon dies was kind of similar to what the Mandalorian did, and then all the people are down there like stripping the meat and the gore and stuff off of the dead dragon. That's what they're doing in Dragonslayer too. It's like almost scene for scene. I'm like, wow. So, and that's a Disney Lucasfilm thing too. So it's like they have their source material. They're just, man, but yeah, Dragonslayer is awesome. So what was your next? I mean, we've touched on Clash of the Titans. We don't. It'll take us all night, but
yeah, I can go on forever. I mean, Clash of Titans to me, I mean, it's the end of an era, right? Because I definitely grew up on the Harryhausen, Sinbad movies. Clash of Titans was the last hurrah, right? And possibly the best when you look at the effects in that one versus the other movies. Man, I mean, Clash of Titans still looks pretty dang wonderful. I love that movie to the nth degree. I don't
What's
think you can not have a conversation about these kind of movies and not bring it up. So
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is I remember when I first saw it. I mean, just being blown away. And once again, when you don't have CGI, whenever things are stop motion, especially in a area, you don't see the choppiness in it until later.
yeah,
When you're growing up and you're looking at it after a long sense of separation. But Clash of the Titans is one of those that Scott and I have talked a lot about. That like if you wanted to deploy CGI properly, you wouldn't
yeah,
remake Clash of the Titans. What you
right.
would do is you would digitize the existing
Enhance.
Clash of the Titans
Yep,
and kind of clean up some of the choppiness of the motion, but leave Harryhausen's original work intact
yep,
and
yep,
just like add some stuff between the frames so that it
yep.
moves a little bit. But man, Medusa to me is still one
Oh
of the
yeah.
most horrifying villains on TV that's ever been rendered. Um,
Everything about it, the witches with the eye, the all seeing
oh, they're
eye. I mean, it's just
arguing about it. Like, give it to
yeah,
me, give it to me.
yeah. I mean the just everything about it, man. It's just great. Uh, yeah, another Helming episode for sure. I know we covered that movie because that's just another love. But I want to bring up Kroll, man. I love me some Kroll.
See, Kroll's one I need to revisit because I used to watch that a lot when I was a kid, and I haven't watched it in probably 20 years. But it's
Dude, it's so fantastic. It
Mhm.
kind of brings you back to that Beastmaster thing to where it's so beyond the normal that you just buy into it. But there's some really, really dark stuff in that movie, man.
I mean, I remember I remember the glaive.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Everybody wanted one of those. Like
It's amazing because I mean, look how impressed we were by it, right? Because we grew up with that Ninja Star age, right? So this is like the ultimate Ninja Star that you can control, and it ends up being like the most worthless
yeah,
tool.
it was neat looking, but it didn't really do much.
Well, I mean, he went into a volcano and reached his hand down in lava to get this thing, and he throws it and it sticks into the monster, and it's like, yeah, it just it's like stabbing the monster with a toothpick. It didn't
Yeah.
really do much. Man.
Yeah, I do remember that it was not very good.
But as far as the movie itself, man, it's still very visually striking, man. It's got its own look. Those slayers, man. I used to think those were the most wicked looking things. Uh, I mean, when you hit them in the head and the head is split open and that slimy slug thing would come out and go burrowing down in the ground. How do you top that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
See, and that's
it's
again,
nightmare.
I haven't seen it in so long, but you're mentioning these things, and I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's some scary stuff in there. Yeah.
Oh, and you had the whole shapeshifter thing, right? Because you had the seer, the old blind guy that was leading them where they need to go, and then you find out that they've replaced him with a changeling, and he's got he opens his eyes and they're just jet black. There's nothing in them, just as scary as everything, man. Yeah, revisit Kroll, man. I'm telling you.
I need to, now that you're mentioning, I'm like, yeah, I need to go back and because that was one that was on a lot,
Yeah.
and like I remember because I'd get sticks. And like I remember my dad one time because I got there was got a stick that was kind of S shaped and I taped them together and made the glaive. And my dad's like, "Why are you making swastikas in the yard?" And I was like, "It's not, Dad. It's a little throwing star thing."
So my buddy RJ, which I know he'll listen to this because this is his kind of bag, but he's gotten into making movie props like guns and other stuff from famous movies, and he actually has made a glaive.
Oh wow!
And he's also made one of the axes that one of the bad guys. Not one of the bad guys. He's one of the prisoners that ends up helping fight the bad guys, and it's a very distinct looking axe. If you probably don't remember this either, but Liam Neeson's in Kroll.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow! I definitely need to go back and check that out.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I don't think you'll be disappointed at all, man. I think
like,
it still holds up.
I mean, I never disliked it. I remember liking it a
Yeah.
lot when I was a kid. It's been one of those that I just haven't. It's like
I, I think you'll like it even more now. I bet you.
we're gonna do an episode here, about Canadians, because I was watching Uncle Buck the other day, and we've been talking about Rick Moranis since day one. But today I got a sealed copy of Strange Brew. Like,
Oh.
I haven't seen that in forever. But I'm like, dude, we got like, I'm gonna watch that, and we'll talk about that in a couple days, because I haven't seen Strange Brew probably since like Wayne's World, so early '90s.
Wow.
Yeah, because
man, I've seen that so many times. I mean, I don't even have to see it. I can walk you through it.
well, dude, I'm excited because I remember loving like it's just one of those movies that's just so dumb that you just like, it's just so hilarious.
Yeah.
And I can't help it, like going back and watching stuff like Ghostbusters. It's like, I always love Ghostbusters, but like, you always had a favorite in either like Bill Murray, like you had, and then like as an adult, I'm like, nope. Rick Moranis,
right?
just takes that movie and runs with it. And if you don't think so, watch it, and then just pay attention to every scene he's in. Right. If he's not in it, he's not stealing it. But if he's in it, it's his completely. And it's so awesome. So yeah, like going back and revisiting these movies that you haven't seen in forever, it's like, I remember a lot of stuff, but probably not enough to talk about it well. But yeah, I need to go back and see Kroll. So we'll revisit that. Well, where are we? Are we gonna get booted? I don't know what the timing is. It usually has a little thing up here, but this time's not telling me. It'll just it'll tell me, I guess. So what's next on your list?
The Sword and the Sorcerer, which we also covered on Helming. You remember that one?
I'm thinking Sword in the Stone by the Disney movie.
No, this is Sword and the Sorcerer. This is where it's Lee Horsley, and he's got a sword. It's got 3 blades on it, and he can hit a button, and 2 of them will project and like shoot and stab people. But the thing about that movie is the bad guy, which is Richard Mull, I think. Wow. They bring him back from the dead, and he's the sorcerer, and he's covered in just blood and stuff, and scary looking, man. I'm telling you, the first 10 minutes of that movie is, I mean, it's straight up horror movie stuff, because they ask him about his powers, and he looks at a girl across the room, or I think it's actually a dude, and he just does his hand like this and just pulls the dude's heart out from across the room.
Oh, wow. It's like, I'm pretty badass.
I tell you what, man, it's right up there, man. It's one of those, it's got a little bit of lag in it, but I highly recommend Sword and the Sorcerer.
I'll have to check that one out, because my next one I was going to go to was Willow.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Willow was one of those that, I mean, first of all, the casting is awesome. Like, just the movie itself is just great. But the costuming in that, like the bad guy with the skull mask.
Absolutely.
And Val Kilmer was like at the top of his game right then.
Yep.
Like, there was no, I mean, and later on he did a lot of stuff. Val Kilmer's awesome,
mm-hmm.
But that was whenever he was still coming up. Like, he hadn't hit peak Val Kilmer yet. He was on his, but
right.
It was so good, and then of course Warwick Davis is just killing it. Joe and Whaley. It was such, I mean, Willow was one of those that, like, it was a fantasy movie whenever they were kind of starting to peter out. Like, that was, and it was kind of like, oh, these things are still good. Like, you can still have fun with this sort of this thing. And
look at where we're at. I mean, we're about to have a whole series based off of it again. Mm-hmm. So, so there's people that go, hey, remember how good Willow was? I mean, so it's still an impressive movie.
Yeah. And yeah, I just got a copy of it not too long ago. I'm ready to go jump back in because, like you said, whenever it was, you know, just the way these things work, like I always loved Beastmaster, but I was brought back to Beastmaster by way of Phantasm, and then just like, oh yeah, Beastmaster's awesome. Well, now I want to watch Dragonslayer. Like it was just like I used to watch these things like almost interchangeably, and then I'd get Beastmaster combined with Conan, and like so I've got Conan over there. I need to pop back in and do you want to live
Still
forever?
amazing. Still amazing.
Um,
I mean, just yeah. I mean, that's the thing about it because there's that it was that whole movement, right? And then you had all your knockoff movies, your Tor movies and Ator and all these other things. There's a lot of them that I really just kind of skipped over
mm-hmm.
because I felt like I'd already seen the ones that I was going to like.
No, totally. Like I'm right there with you in that, it's like you do have, like you said, varying quality. Like Conan 2, yeah, that's so good. But the first one, like you can't judge the second one by the first because the first one's amazing. Right. And dude, when homeboy cuts off his mom's head, like that scene, that cinematically, where it's just like in that slow motion, and you think for a split second that he's gonna let her go, but then he doesn't, and then just like you're like, that's
heart crushing, man. Yeah, that's I mean, that movie is still, I mean, well, I don't think we'd have any of these movies if it wasn't for the success of Conan.
Mm-hmm.
It just really made everybody want to start making those kind of movies because it was done so well. De Laurentiis, man.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's that thing, right? Because it's always a shot in the dark with De Laurentiis, but he nailed it on that one.
Well, I think too, it's kind of like with the Canon movies. It's like, well, just give it a shot, see what happens.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you look at his lineup, he didn't specialize in damn near anything. He just kind of was like, hey, you think we could sell this? Sure. All right, let's do it. But yeah, man. I mean, and outside of the movies, when I was a kid, because Star Wars, it was space fantasy, but it's still sword and sorcery.
Right.
And then you
Absolutely.
have, like again, He-Man. Pretty much the only thing that got me out of that world was G.I. Joe's, but dude, I was so big into He-Man. Like I used to get 2 belts, and tie them around, and like I had the stuff, like I had the toys, the actual dress up stuff, but it's like I'd tie 2 belts and I'd carry around, I'd have a stick stuck in as a sword. I used to like swing my lightsabers or sticks or whatever around and get that sound that you get from it's like I was little mini He-Man or little mini Beastmaster, and there were so many of us that were like that. I mean, nobody would look at a kid, swinging a sword in his front yard and be like, "Look at that little weirdo." No way, man. We like go down there and like fight. It was a whole different fantastical world,
Yep. And you have to. I mean, let's get real about it. If it wasn't for Lord of the Rings and that whole concept, even Star Wars would be what Star Wars is, because you look at those characters and you're going, yeah, that's the Fellowship of the Ring. I mean, that's what these people are.
Yeah.
And so, you can trace it all the way back to that and go back to your Sinbad stories. That's where all this stuff comes from, the Arabian Nights, all that kind of good stuff. And it's weird that it's all kind of captured in this one little point in the 80s. And it just kind of disappeared. I mean, Canon tried, right, with Ferrigno doing the Hercules stuff in the late 80s, which were, not good.
Well, I think in order to, like, the lightning in the bottle sort of situation, I think you've kind of got this confluence of, you can make an effective fantasy movie without special effects, right? It's just how much magic that you actually want to put in there, but you can use literal smoke and mirrors to get your point across on a lower budget. like space movies, not so much. Like you need green screens and you need models and you need costuming and robots and little blinky lights and
Yep.
that kind of stuff. Whereas you can shoot an effective fantasy movie in the desert or in the
Yep.
mountains or in a cave. So you have a lot more options if you're going to make a fantasy movie about like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to build it? There's a lot of castles that you can rent to film in a castle if you need to, right?
Right.
But the 80s were this place where it's like, okay, we've got that set piece in California that every Western and every space movie that was ever made, that's
Yep.
just where we film. But now we've got some ILM stuff via Star Wars and Disney that we can kind of add to the mix and
Yep.
That sort of thing. So you had this experimental phase, I think, where they were actually still trying to make good movies. They weren't just special effects, but the special effects were like, okay, we got to be real careful because we've got one shot at this, and if it doesn't work, then we have to cut
Right.
the whole scene. But the
Well,
special effect, well, what I mean, but the special effect didn't define the movie. It wasn't a
right.
special effects extravaganza, is what I mean. Is like, well, you've heard
It's
those movies where it's like, well, like, what was it Canon did? Somebody posted it the other day. It was right after our Canon episode came on. It was like Cyborg 2. That was a Canon film. That was a sequel to Cyborg, but instead it was a discarded screenplay that was not finished for a sequel to Masters of the Universe, using a set that they built for a Masters of the Universe sequel. But for whatever reason, they couldn't get the licensing to do the Masters of the Universe sequel, so they just made this
call it something else.
He-Man-esque movie and set it in this He-Man set. So like, why wouldn't they call it He-Man? But they couldn't because of licensing.
Yep. Yep.
But those are the sorts of things where it's like, if like you say, that one scene blew the whole budget for Masters of the Universe, and therefore like that whole franchise died with that one scene, because they were trying to make a special effects extravaganza.
What's funny too is you go back and you watch some of these, I don't want to say lower grade, but some of these other movies that were trying to do the adventure film, the fantasy film, and it's supposed to be back in these medieval times or whatever, fantasy times, and a guy builds a bamboo hang glider.
Yeah.
And while he's flying over this big open field, but you can see tire tracks where a truck's been out there. It's just like, I don't know if we just overlooked and didn't see that, or.
Well, it's like Spartacus and their watches and stuff. It's like, hey, everybody, take off your watches.
Oh, yeah, man. I love these movies, and to me, it had a direct effect to, which is the other thing I was kind of bringing up. I loved this morphed for me into the ragtag team, the A-team scenario, right? Where, we always talk about, what was the movie that we talked about on Helming? But it was like an android and a ninja and where you group all these people together and make a super fighting team. Dang, I can't believe I went blank on it.
I know what you're talking about, but I went blank on it too. But no, it's
the Eliminators. The Eliminators. Yeah. So I mean, somehow coming out of these type of movies led me into that whole scenario that I loved. The oddball. It's like the Bad News Bears teaming up together to go
save the world.
An evil sorcerer or something.
Or like Let's Get Hairy or whatever, where it's like,
yeah,
just a whole bunch of random nobodies. It's like, hey, let's go to South America and fight drug dealers, and they're like, okay, let's roll.
And the reason it works is because even Conan, look at what he did. He put a ragtag team together. Here's a guy's pretty good with knives. Here's this woman that's just as tough as I am. And we're going to go fight a guy that turns into a snake. Hey, let's go. And a magician. We got a magician with us, So that scenario, and again, it goes back to Lord of the Rings, putting an unlikely group together to go conquer the most incredible evil.
Yeah,
Something I dig about that.
Well, it's the hero's journey. You know,
Yeah.
that's Joseph Campbell, who's a big writer about mythologies and you know archetypes and stuff. And
Yeah.
like it's funny because there was a museum exhibit many years ago. It was called The Power of Myth, and it had like Star Wars costuming, and it had Joseph Campbell's lectures. And he's talking about basically, so like we've got as a species, we've got this kind of, well, first of all, we like stories, we like communicating, and stories kind of form our reality of who we are. And before we could communicate with words, we would communicate by acting things out. And we still do that with people whose languages we don't understand. So it's like, oh man, there's a there, there's a tiger coming, and you're like, I don't understand you, and you're like, ah, it's like, okay, I understand what that means. So if you put that guy in a costume, it resonates. Anybody knows that a guy dressed as a tiger is either a guy dressed as a tiger or he's supposed to be a tiger, and you don't need a whole lot more explanation than to know that he's bad news and he's dangerous.
Right.
And then as you get more sophisticated, then you land on something like Darth Vader, where it's like his very presence tells you he's bad news. Like you don't need a lot of backstory. You just need to know that watch out for that guy. And then you have different archetypical characters, and the archetypes means that you can have varying personalities across this genre, but whenever you have like your hero is generally somebody who is not involved, doesn't want to be involved, has no skin in the game, and through no fault of his own gets pulled in.
Yeah.
So Lord of the Rings, Luke Skywalker,
Chief Brody.
Chief Brody. I was gonna say like not so much Peter McNichol, because he was the apprentice. He signed up.
He was trying. He was trying to be that person, right?
But Perseus, like he's not.
Yeah,
he wasn't.
Absolutely.
He was like, no. Well, I guess here we are. Conan, he's the same thing. Like he would have grown up and been some kind of a farmer if his mom hadn't gotten decapitated and he got put on the yoke. But
sure did.
Like there's certain things about these characters, regardless of the surroundings, that just resonate with us, and especially with children, because we're like, there's good guys and there's bad guys. And then there's people like Han Solo who are good-hearted but just do what they need to do to get by, and they're an archetypical character too. And you like them all the more because that's the one you really want to be.
The older you get, that's more who you gravitate towards, but because as a kid, like you said, it's good and evil, right? I mean, that's the story, and that's where you're at, and that's the appeal again. I mean, even as a young kid watching Conan and seeing his mother killed, standing there right in front of him, you're already on Team Conan, even though you see him becoming what he becomes. I mean, in that den, fighting all those people, raping all the women and stuff, and you're still like, yeah, Team Conan.
Yep. Because no matter how bad he is, he didn't cut off his mom's head.
Right.
That was somebody else, and Conan needs to get his revenge. I think the thing just let us go because we're way over time. So
awesome.
Have
you ever heard of Circle of Iron?
No, I have not.
Okay, Circle of Iron, not the best movie. It's basically a story. David Carradine plays like 3 or 4 characters in it. It's kind of like a Conan type movie, but it's a bit more martial arts. It was on HBO all the time when I was a kid, and it's one of those that I've always loved, but I really don't know why.
I've never heard of it actually. So
that's Circle of Iron. Yeah, I say check that one out too, because it has a very Conan type feel, but it's martial arts. I think even Bruce Lee actually helped. It's like it was one of his ideas for a script, and Carradine ran with it. And it's interesting. I still like it. Um, Excalibur, man, man,
Yeah,
I almost have to redo the whole show now because Excalibur to me might be top, but that's a little different because we are looking at actual King Arthur folklore type thing.
true. But I mean, no, Excalibur was certainly
Wow.
the thing is that Excalibur has that was different than the others because if you remember when we were kids, there was no Lord of the Rings. There was only that animated one,
Right.
and
Bakshi, yeah.
but Excalibur, the way it was filmed and the way it plays out, almost seems more like a documentary. Like
It's
it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels
yeah,
like you're watching a storybook, I guess.
yeah.
But it feels like it's true. It feels like it's
Very
real.
very surreal, beautifully shot. Uh the music in it. I mean, it's like watching a stage play, really. I mean,
Hmm.
because these characters that are on there, they're all stage actors. So you kind of get that. It's very British. It's John Boorman. So there you
Hmm.
go. You kind of get that. So uh, the story's not correct, but I really, really love Excalibur, man.
The end part where Morgan Morgan is
Oh yeah.
stabbed and like pulls
Holy
himself
smokes.
across the the
Wow.
spear. You're just like, dude, that's gotta hurt a
There's
lot.
some there's a lot of scenes in Excalibur that are very, very bloody. And
Hmm.
it's
I just
yeah,
remember that one specifically because you're like, oh,
oh
he's
yeah.
got, and
Yeah.
then he's just like,
Wait
not
a minute.
quite yet.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm not done with you
God.
yet. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Uh,
Man, well, I think I already went through my list. I'm like, dude, there was so many good stuff. Well, you had the Sword in the Stone,
mhm.
the cartoon from Disney, which
Yep.
we didn't talk much about, but like that's a really good. That's a King Arthur, but that's a prequel to
Yep.
pre-Arthur, pre King Arthur prequel, which was really really good. That's another like kind of introduction to fantasy, and then um, there was the other one. There was another dark. Was it? It wasn't Sword and Stone. You mentioned Sword and the Sorcerer.
Yeah.
There was another dark Disney fantasy.
Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron. That was it.
Yeah.
That yeah, Disney got pretty dark there for a while.
They did, man. They really did. I mean, you have to be shocked when you look at Dragonslayer and you see that that this is you know haphazardly created in conjunction with Disney. You're like, what were they thinking?
Yeah. Well, they just got done with a black hole, so like,
Right. Yeah.
it's Event Horizon Light. Let's
Yeah. Really. Yeah. And how about you got your sci-fi fantasy stuff too, like uh, Metal Storm. I don't know if you ever saw Metal Storm around, but
Mm-mm.
they all kind of have the same feel to them. It's fantasy movies, but you got more of a Mad Max type character in it, right?
Okay.
Because you're fighting stuff in Cherry 2000, all these movies that kind of fit under that Metal Storm, the what was it, Metal Storm, the destruction of Jared Dead or some crap like that. I say that in passing, but I've seen it several times.
Well, there's a lot of those like that were just
Jared Sin or whatever the goofy name was.
there's a lot of those just like the sci-fi stuff, and it's
Yeah.
the fantasy sci-fi. I mean, that was just our world back then.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you guys horror fans? Like Disney.
Yeah. Because everything we watch had horror elements in it. I mean,
even the stuff that wasn't supposed to did. It
crap, man. Think about what we just talked about with Beastmaster and them putting the little glow in the dark leeches in their ear. Where's the other place you've seen leeches put in the ear? Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
I went to the theater to see Star Trek 2 and lost my mind when that happened in that movie.
It's true, man.
Yeah.
I mean, well, and that's it's one of those like, it's such a violation because the dude's all tied down and they're like, here's the brain eating glow in the dark worm. Whoop. Like, he's just, it doesn't take any time at all for him to just like,
Yeah.
I'm over with. Like, this thing's
Yeah.
eating my brain and I'm crazy. Like, how much would that suck? I mean,
Yeah.
you're just like,
Yeah.
ugh. Oh man. Well, I
Good
think I'm
stuff.
gonna go try to find Kroll.
uh,
Well, I think
yeah,
that's been
man.
our that I think I'm gonna call that an episode, dude. That was pretty rad. And they didn't put us
Yeah,
on a
man.
time crunch, so even better. Um
And I'm sure there's a ton that we didn't talk about because I know there's your Red Sonja. There was a movie called She, which was the counterpart to Conan. She kind of had her own spin-off kind of thing that they did. There's a ton of these that came out right after Conan, and I'm sure there's ones that we're missing, but these are the ones that, to me, if you're into this kind of stuff, I can't recommend them enough.
yeah. And again, that was just that early 80s experimental
Yeah,
phase with all kinds of violence and gore, and they're all like rated G or PG, which is
yeah,
odd, but
yeah.
you know, it's awesome. It's- but cool. Well, I think that's an episode, so we're going to cut it off and we will see you next week.
Adios.